ultimately it's about understanding what your risks are. You know, you want to structure a balance sheet, you want to have access to capital, you want to have sufficient liquidity, and we're going through a cycle, which is not uncommon, where all of a sudden money is not only expensive, but it's harder to get.
Joining me today is Steve Sterrett, lead trustee with Equity Residential. Steve, thank you so much for joining us today.
Happy to do it.
Now, as the longtime CFO of Simon Properties, you help steer the company through many different interest rate environments and economic ups and downs. What advice would you give to REIT CFOs who are facing some of those challenges for the first time?
You know, I think it's interesting because really ever since the 2008, 2009 crisis, money has been plentiful and cheap. So anyone who's in a finance function job now, capital raising, CFO, treasurer, whatever, you know, if they're under the age of 35, they've never been in an environment when money wasn't very plentiful and very, very cheap. So I think the best advice I could give would be to go back and learn from history. You know, it's interesting. If you did a 10-year analysis of what the 10-year Treasury was, it's probably in the 2.5% range. But if you do a 50-year analysis, it's really common that the cost of money could be 5, 6, 7%. So go back and kind of learn from history. But ultimately, it's about understanding what your risks are. You know, you want to structure a balance sheet, you want to have access to capital, you want to have sufficient liquidity, and we're going through a cycle, which is not uncommon, where all of a sudden money is not only expensive, but it's harder to get. And so you need to understand, as a CFO especially, you need to understand what your risks are, because risks are asymmetric, and you don't want to take an undue amount of risk for just a minimal amount of benefit.
Now, you've been a board member of several public companies, and as I mentioned, are now the lead director for Equity Residential. What have you learned from those experiences that you wish you had maybe better appreciated when you were at a REIT?
You know, I sat on the other side of the table as the CFO of Simon for 20 plus years. And it was always interesting to me, and I never really appreciated the fact that a director comes in once a quarter. They, in Simon's case, may or may not have been a real estate person, may not have really understood the idiosyncrasies of our business. But that's not the role of a director. You know, the director is not managing the business. They're not in the weeds every day. I had a consultant once that told me, he had a phrase, he called them TLAs, 3-letter acronyms. Well, every industry is full of these little 3-letter acronyms. And if you're sitting on the management side and you're in the weeds every day, those are second nature to you. If you're a director and you come in once a quarter and this isn't the industry that you grew up in, and even for me relating retail real estate to multifamily real estate, lease length is different, buildings are different size. I mean, it's very different. And so the one thing that, and I always thought as a CFO that I was pretty good at being what I called pedantic, trying to, and it's not, I don't want to say it's dumbing it down, but you're in a graduate level course because you're running the company and you're there fighting fires and trying to make it better every day. A director doesn't have that level of knowledge and understanding, but what they do have is all these life experiences and the ability to relate something that they saw in their career or in their industry that could be of immense value to you and yours, and to help educate them on the issue, but to do it in such a way that they can then impart their experience. I think it's a real art, and I don't think, I didn't have the appreciation when I was sitting on the management side of the table, even though I thought I did, and now I look at it in a whole different way.
And finally, you're a member of the EQR Board Audit Committee. How have the oversight responsibilities of REIT board audit committees changed in recent years?
There were all these massive frauds back 20, 25 years ago. And I'm talking about WorldCom and Enron, and I think it was Adelphia, the cable company. Sarbanes-Oxley kind of came out of that. And I remember joking with David Simon, who was our CEO at Simon, one day. I said, David, we should take great pride in the fact that, you know, the SEC is holding us to our feet to the fire for one of the 1,800 people that they're going to make accountable for all the transgressions of the past. Because if you remember, it came out that CEOs and CFOs had to certify that they knew what was in the financials, they were fully aware of it, and they were basically signing away a potential perjury charge if it turned out that they didn't really know what was in it. And I said, you know, wow, we're in a select group. I don't know it's necessarily a club that you want to be a member of, but here we were. But one of the byproducts of that, if you roll the clock forward now 10, 15 years, there's been almost no large-scale public company fraud. Why? Well, you know, the defense of I didn't know isn't a valid defense anymore. So management teams are more in tune with what's in the financials. Certainly the accounting firms are more in tune with their audit approaches and what to look for and all that. So in one instance, I think we've kind of de-risked the audit and the filing of financial statement process. But on the other side, you've got all this other stuff, and I'm thinking about ESG reporting. It's not necessarily audit committee, but more comp committee, say on pay, and all the compensation disclosures that are in a proxy now. And so it's become at least as complex as it used to be, but it's different. We used to worry about, are the financial statements right? Are the subjective matters in there right? You still pay attention to that, but that doesn't seem to be the bleeding edge issues now. The bleeding edge issues are more around, as an audit committee, how are we going to get comfortable if the SEC requires climate disclosure? That's an interesting question that I don't think a lot of people have an answer for yet. So it's different, but it's still, you know, it's still enjoyable.